Welcome to City Cinematheque, where the art and pleasure of the movies are the subject of serious discussion. I'm your host, Jerry Carlson, and I teach film studies at the City College of the City University of New York. Today, it's our pleasure to present the 1972 film, The Dupes, directed by Tewfik Saleh. This film tells the story of three Palestinian refugees in the 1950s and their struggle to cross from Iraq into Kuwait, where they hope jobs will be waiting for them. It's a rich film visually, and it's a rich film historically and politically. We'll be able to talk about that and a host of other things after today's screening. It's a pleasure to welcome back to City University Television Richard Peña from the Film Society of Lincoln Center. Now, enjoy this rare opportunity to see a film that ends with a suspense sequence I think you'll never forget, The Dupes. Welcome back to City Cinematheque. You just saw the end of what I think is an extraordinarily powerful film, and one I hope we see more of films like this. And I think we have the privilege of giving an American television premiere of this, and I think we're quite proud to do so, to show audiences how rich the archive of world cinema is once we start looking into it. And we have today as our guest to talk about this enormously rich film itself, somebody who I think is an archive of knowledge about world cinema, Richard Peña. As many of our viewers know, Richard is with the Film Society of Lincoln Center. He also serves as a professor of film studies at Columbia University. Welcome back to CUNY TV, Richard.
Hi, Jerry.
Let's start with the fact that this is a film that takes as its centerpiece the Palestinian issue,
right.
the plight of Palestinians after the formation of Israel. How has that issue circulated or been a part of the cinemas, in the plural, of the Arab-speaking world?
Mm-hmm. Well, first, I think you have to realize that the Palestinian issue within the Arab world, I think, both has a specific and a general component. The specific component is the varying opinions and differing positions on the Arab-Israeli conflict and the role of a possible Palestinian state, whatever. The more general one is the sense of Arab weakness, the sense that Arabs have not been able to control their own destiny, that even as late as World War II, part of what they perceived to be their land could be parceled out to people who weren't from there. So in that sense, you have these two components. Specifically, there are a number of films that deal with the Palestinian issue, this obviously being an important one, kind of based on a Palestinian novella shot and produced by Syria by a wonderful Egyptian director. Right. There are also films like Nakhla from Algeria, which deals with a Palestinian living in exile who loses her voice and the whole inability for her to speak. But indeed, the Palestinian issue, and especially the 1967 defeat for the Arab armies, had a tremendous impact and was seen in many different films and in very many different guises. This deals quite specifically with it. Other films deal with it in a more oblique manner, I would say.
Okay. Well, I think you bring up the very interesting point that it's very easy, I think, from our side of the pond and through the way we receive information to sort of assume that this is some kind of binary opposition, as opposed to the fact, as I think you so well put it, that this is an issue dealt with by different artists in very different ways who are taking very different positions on what actually is the issue, how should the issue be dealt with, what is important to represent of the issue itself. Let's talk a little bit about this director. I know that you've had the privilege of meeting him because I think everybody, if our viewers don't know, if they didn't have the privilege of seeing some of the films in the splendid retrospective that Lincoln Center launched of cinema of the Arab-speaking world, a number of directors were brought here for that, and he was one of them. Tell us a little bit about him. He's a major Egyptian director,
yes,
though this film was made in Syria. Tell us a little bit about him, his career, and where this film fits in his oeuvre.
Well, this is a film. Tewfik Saleh is someone who has not made a great number of films, but he is someone who's made enormously influential films. I think in many ways, if we want to think of something that we could call the modern Egyptian cinema, I think it springs from two sources, one being Youssef Chahine, the celebrated director, an extraordinary filmmaker, and Tewfik Saleh. In fact, I think you can go back to the mid-50s to within the space of a single year when Shahine's Cairo Station and Tewfik Saleh's Street of Fools, sometimes called Alley of Fools or whatever, Darm al-Ghareb, were released at the same time. In many ways, these represented, I think, the beginning of a new Arab cinema, an Arab cinema that was in many ways being filtered through the guise of the neo-realist aesthetic at that time, films that were taking much more critical internal views of Arab society. And indeed, while Chahine was able to amass quite a large and rich filmography, Tewfik Saleh, for various reasons, has not made many films, although quite a few of them, such as Street of Fools or especially The Dupes, have been widely praised and deeply influential.
Okay. Now, this is an odd film in one sense. I just want to talk about its sort of production conditions, in that he's an Egyptian director who has a Syrian co-production, but in fact the film is set in the 1950s. It's made in 1972, but people should understand that the setting, because historical markers for Western viewers are not always that clear, is set in the 1950s, and the particular setting largely is the passage from Iraq to Kuwait. Is this kind of co-production and also multinational combination typical of the cinemas of the Arab world?
It isn't that typical. It's becoming a little bit more so. For example, the wonderful Syrian film The Night, which was shown a few years ago actually at the New York Film Festival, was shot by a Tunisian director, and other films, there's a sort of intra-Arab trading of technicians and talent that way. So I think it is quite distinctive at its time. There had been a certain amount of Egyptian co-production, especially with Lebanon in the 50s and early 60s, but I think this case was sort of, there were political reasons for it. Some of it was the message. I mean, I think Tewfik Saleh is very much looking critically at the behavior of the Arab world in general towards the Palestinians, that indeed these people have been abandoned, that indeed these people, their struggle has not been taken seriously, that indeed the Arabs themselves have now become among the oppressors of the Palestinian people. So this was, as you can imagine, not a popular message, and I think one that certainly was roundly criticized in some quarters, but I think it's part of the courage of this wonderful artist and extraordinary man, Tewfik Saleh, to face quite head-on indeed the way in which the Palestinian issue has so often been used as an excuse for different kinds of domestic politics and other affairs.
Again, to come back to a point that I made earlier, I think this is another way in which this film breaks with a lot of the binary oppositions that are really common to the way in which issues of the Mideast are framed here, so that most people would think that the common way, if you simply say, oh, here is a film, it's going to be about Palestinian refugees, then the bulk of the materials, insofar as it is critical, would be directed right at Israel. Whereas, while clearly the formation of the State of Israel, the fighting, the creation of the refugee camps, the creation of displaced persons is key to this film, there's no question. There's no question where the film is taking its position on that. That is not, as you, I think, so well point out, that is not where the energies of this film are primarily or dominantly located. They're located in this passage of the various fates of why do people get to a border, presumably of two states that should be sympathetic exactly to the plight of this, but have a complex set of dynamics between those two states themselves. And then in addition to that, we have the issue of who's going to help these people. That is very concretely played out in the film in terms of those characters that each of the three protagonists or refugees meet. And all of this given to us, and this is, I think, something we wanted to talk about, in an extraordinarily rich, and I think in a number of ways, period-driven style. You and I were chatting a little bit before we went on camera about how this is very much, in a certain way, internationally, putting apart the Arab filmmaking world for a second, internationally a film of its particular moment. In what ways do you think that's true?
Well, Tewfik Saleh, just as an artist, is someone who has an extraordinary depth of knowledge about world cinema, and someone who I know always kept abreast of many things that are going on. Certainly looking at this film, both in its look in terms of the highly contrasty black and white cinematography that might be a little tough on TV, but if you see a good print of it, the heat of the desert, of the extraordinary force of nature that one feels in the film really comes off the screen. One can really look at, say, some Brazilian films from the late 60s, the work of people like Glauber Rocha or Nelson Pereira dos Santos, or Cuban cinema, of course, works like Lucia, or so many films, Days of Water, that again have this enormously sensuous kind of physical use of cinematography in that way to really give one the kind of oppression of nature in that sense. Also, the kind of shifting of time frames and whatever. In a way, one can think of the film as almost, in a somewhat contradictory way, classically modernist. I mean, it's very much a kind of modernist text, film text, one that I think we have not seen enough of from the Arab world, since we tend, I think, to either see the films as divided into harsh realism or popular entertainment. But in fact, there always was and continues to be a kind of modernist, much more kind of experimental sector of filmmaking, of which Tewfik Saleh is a great representative. So indeed, in the kind of mixing of time frames, the use of documentary footage alongside fictional footage, these are very much markers of the era. And again, I think it does, Tewfik Saleh or the film no shame to sort of compare it to many other films, such as, say, Memories of Underdevelopment, which do something similar. It was certainly in the air at that time. It was a technique that was widely used, and here it's used extremely effectively.
Yes. One of the things I think that was probably striking to an audience the first time they see it is exactly this similarity to works that people may know from other countries. But also what comes as a part of that tradition is the richness of characterization that comes with this fragmentation, the way in which the characters are not allowed to be a simple thing, although I think in this particular film they also remain allegorical figures of a kind. They in this film, they also represent three very different generations in some sense. What do you think, how does characterization work in this film, and how would you compare it with the way characterization works in other examples of cinema from the Arab-speaking world?
That's a tough question. I mean, because different people use or understand that term characterization in different ways.
Certainly.
Let me just say, I think that the film exudes something that we rarely attribute to the Arab world or to Arab culture, and that's complexity.
Okay.
I mean, I think that so often in our understanding of things Arab or things Middle Eastern or things non-Western, we tend to attribute sort of one shade to the entire process. And I think here is a film of enormous subtlety, of enormous shading, as you say, that really looks at the problem from different points of view, takes unexpected positions in ways, has unexpected targets. So the characterization, I think, goes along with that sense of really wanting to present a very sometimes contradictory portrait of these people.
Absolutely. I think you bring up an excellent point there. And there's this distance between what could be, the kind of summary that's necessary in, say, a television guide of this. Three Palestinians try to cross the border. And that brings with it really a description like that, I think, maybe brings a lot of our simplifications, unnecessary simplifications with it about what this is going to be like. It does not really imply the kinds of contradictions in their lives. Just to bring up some very obvious things, we do not associate, for example, falsely or not, the whole question that the younger son is there because his father has divorced and married for property. We do not necessarily assume that the older man would be married, would only have a small family, married later in life, etc., because there are a set of stereotypes that certainly come with a number of Western treatments of Arab culture, and come from a whole set of other sources we have as well. Excuse me for the cough. Now, what about why these three characters? Why choose these particular three characters? Why do you think they're essential to the story?
I think, as you said, I mean, to really give almost a different generational barometer to, you know, what was, for the Palestinian people, the tragedy of '48. I mean, the sense of their displacement and how these different people from different walks of life, different backgrounds, different aspirations, how they saw this, that there wasn't one stock response, there wasn't one stock reason for the emigration that went on, or the different stories. I think it's to show that indeed in every family there was a different story, and different people reacted in different ways to what was going on.
Well, and that brings us back to the film, and stylistically as well, because one of the things is one of those paradoxes that you've already pointed towards, is one of the characteristics of stylistically of classic modernism is actually heterogeneity of style. I mean, you can talk about it in a novel like Ulysses, where every chapter is in a different style, but it crosses all of the arts. And so while there are certain devices we can talk about, like the cinematography or fragmentation in general, in fact, in the first half to two-thirds of the film, we learn about three different characters, but we actually learn about them in different ways. There are differences in each of the portraits, not only of what we learn about the characters, but the ways in which we learn about them. Yes, it's all through flashback, but we enter their lives at different moments of the action. Some of the devices used for the flashback differ from sequence to sequence, where they're not treated in the end with exact equivalence, because one of the issues of that is they do not have lives that are it's not only that they're not exactly equivalent, but they have lives that can't have as much backstory because of the different ages of the three of them. And then, of course, we have the introduction of the truck driver himself. That raises again, an issue you've already talked about a little bit, about what is the responsibility of one to another. The fact that there is a Palestinian who is there, who they have their doubts about whether even he is the one they can trust in this enterprise.
Well, even the whole question of crossing borders. I mean, at heart in the Palestinian issue is the notion that the Arab land or the Arab world is one, that indeed it forms one unity, and to take out discreetly or indiscreetly a chunk such as, and to form a state of Israel, is a kind of insult to the entire Arab nation. And again, these were very popular notions, especially during the era of Nasser and when Pan-Arabism was at its height. Here we have an entire drama that's based on crossing borders, where in fact the difference between Iraq and Kuwait is entirely what the film's about. So, I mean, it becomes a kind of very curious reflection for people who, you know, in their sort of very nature have been carved out of their own land or whatever because of different forces, to suddenly be confronting another sort of question of border, to see that indeed this notion of who's a Kuwaiti, who's an Iraqi, who's a Palestinian, what their role is, what does it mean to be a citizen of one country as opposed to a member of the Arab nation. In many ways, these people are caught up in that contradiction. And I think the film points that out brilliantly, as I think the original story does.
And one of the interesting features about that reminds me of a film that many, if not most of our viewers have seen, which is, of course, Jean Renoir's The Grand Illusion, in which the two characters escape into Switzerland in World War I at the end across a field of snow, in which the people pursuing them say, "Stop, don't shoot, they've crossed the border." And Renoir gives the reverse shot of a field of white snow in which there are no markers of any kind, and pointing up the irony of where are these borders? What do borders mean? Where can you see them? And of course, that's dealt with equal visual brilliance in this film, in which we're looking and we're seeing where's the border? What?
And it takes out a special poignance in the situation of Kuwait, which is I think many historians would say, an extraordinarily artificially created nation.
Absolutely, yes, yes.
That, I mean, for whatever, reasons that obviously the Gulf War had, an impact on in terms of our understanding of its, national patrimony and things like that. But, especially that border of all borders seems, among the most problematic, one could say, within this sort of sense of the construction of the Arab world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm as the truck passes from the one set of borders to the other one, I must admit, and perhaps it's just my failing as a spectator, and since this film jumps around in time and space a great deal, when he pulls up to the second one, I said to myself,
wasn't he just there?
Wasn't he just?
Yeah. Yeah. No, but again, I think it's classically, again, I mean, the sort of modernism of Tewfik Saleh, I think, is precisely predicated on that. I mean, it's to give us the sense that, my God, have we gone back in time? Are we seeing the sequence again?
Exactly.
As he's done so many experiments, with, sort of time and composition, whatever in the film, there is that sense, very eerie sense for a moment, that God, they haven't gone anywhere, that they're back in the same place where they were a few minutes ago. And then, of course, the narrative continues and realizes that it indeed is a different place. But there's very little that would indicate that.
And even though we have had a number of, like we have had of all characters, interior views, so we know, in one sense, we know this driver rather well. The doubts that the others have had about it is, Eve said, my goodness, has he circled around and brought them back? Did we jump in time, or in the end is part of the suspense that he is yet another betrayer or not? And of course he turns out not to be a betrayer, though things do not, as we well know, having seen the film, turn out well. It's one of the most horrific endings one can imagine. Let's go. We've talked a lot about the visuals of the film and the characters. Another one of the things that puts this film in this epoch of cinematic modernism of the Third World is also the uses of sound in this film. You talked a little bit earlier about the enormous sense of the heat as well. I think few of us will ever forget the sense of the clanging, for example, of metal on the truck, and the way in which that ends to the palpable sense. Or we have the effect of at the end when and again it's slightly ambiguous, is it his tear or merely a drip of sweat as it falls, and the marking of the death of the three inside is by the sizzle of that. So there's a great deal of attention given to the sound montage as well. And I think when we say montage, even though there's a tradition that goes all the way back to Didier Vertov and others and René Clair about the importance of sound as a montage element, we tend to think of, well, no, it's the visuals that. And I'm deeply impressed with all the attention paid to that. Also the sense of the sound environments that they're in.
Well, I think what Saleh does, I mean, part of his strategy, and this I think goes back to his inclusion of the documentary footage.
Yes.
Next to the documentary footage, any filmmaker would have to lay down his or her arms. You cannot get images more poignant, more horrifying, more pathetic in many ways. So he's not going to even vaguely attempt to sort of reproduce that. What he is going to do is he's going to go the other route. Rather than realism, it's going to be impressionism.
Right.
So that indeed, in terms of his storytelling, in terms of the use of sound, there's a kind of sense of freedom that he doesn't have to give you a kind of exact fidelity. Because if he wants to do that, he just go to the documentary footage. They have that footage.
Right.
So now that we have that footage and we can use that as a marker for some kind of objective vision of that, the plight of those people, then the filmmaker is freed into a kind of much looser, more impressionistic depiction of their actual plight. He's not going to attempt to really recreate it so that we feel, God, that was such an incredibly authentic. I mean, while I think it has those elements, much more the impression you get is sort of interior, mental, much looser than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the things we've emphasized up to this point in our discussion is both the Arab filmmaking context of this and the international context, linking it to modernism. But let me just introduce the fact that at least the last third of this film is a film that you could, in one sense, separate it. That is, you could add 5 minutes worth of expository material, giving a little simple portrait of these characters. You could even change what the border is in a certain sense, and what we actually have in those last 30 minutes or so is actually a piece of classical filmmaking in terms of the suspense being built about a particular task that has a set of dangers about it that must be achieved on a strict set of deadlines themselves. And I think that's an actual remarkable thing about the film, is the way in which it gives us so much of the background, historical, biographical for each character, etc., so that we're so deeply invested in them that once the classical style takes over, it takes over with a kind of vengeance.
And as you said, I think, of course, it's always what we refer back to. It becomes our, as viewers, common experience, so that even though we think the driver is on the level, there is always the danger that maybe he's not, that maybe what we've seen before has misled us in a certain way. So that, indeed, it gives us a lot of information, but enough so that all our decisions about these characters and these events later on become that much richer, because we have all this knowledge that we share in the background.
Yeah, and I think one of the things about the film, given its stylistic heterogeneity, again, that I admire about the film, is this way in which, the kind of giving of characterization and context by flashback, fragmentation, use of any number of visual devices in the first two-thirds of the film is complemented by this absolute mastery of the kind of sequence that we might associate, we would associate even with contemporary action pictures, or that we certainly associate with Hitchcock, for example, but that, as you pointed out, is so enriched by what goes up. But it's still the point, is that I don't think we associate easily, we neither associate that kind of modernism with cinema of the Arab-speaking world so much, nor do we associate this kind of classical suspense sequence with that cinema. And the film not only shows both masterfully, but uses them in connection with one another masterfully. What else? We've covered characterization, we've covered some style, and this. What else do you admire in this film, Richard? We just got about a minute or so left, so.
Again, I think that it is a film that comes very much in the wake of, you could do a whole series of films that are reflections in their way of '67, of the defeat of the Arab armies on the part of Israel, and the kind of massive reevaluation of everything from the notion of pan-Arabism to the notion of Palestinian politics. It's interesting, of course, that it comes at a time when indeed it's still taking Egyptian or Algerian or other filmmakers to speak for the Palestinians. Now, of course, there's a vital and growing and ever more impressive Palestinian cinema, which is, of course, speaking for that population itself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A great place. We have to stop now, but this is a very good place to stop indeed. If you'd like more information about City Cinematheque, please drop us a line. Drop it to City Cinematheque, City University Television, 25 West 43rd Street, Suite 1220, New York, New York, 10036. Let me give you that information again. Drop us a line to City Cinematheque, City University Television, 25 West 43rd Street, Suite 1220, New York, New York, 10036. Richard, always a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to having you back again sometime.
Okay.
Okay, and thanks for joining us again today on City Cinematheque. We hope you tune in again. Thank you.